In this video, I'm going to introduce you to three specific form objects that we have not covered yet. They're very important, so it's important that you know how to use these. The first type is the radio button, like so. Let me just make a few of these. The second type is the checkbox. I'll make a few of these as well. And the third one is called the group box, which I'll make one of them. And I'll just resize it, like so. You can move it around however you want. So what's the difference between these? Well, obviously the group box, it acts like a container. I'll talk about this a bit later when we talk about the radio button. But first I want to clarify the difference between the checkboxes and the radio buttons, when you would use one versus the other. So a checkbox is really any time that you might want to, say, select multiple options, not just one. So if you're ordering pizza online and you have the option to add different ingredients, maybe there are 20 different ingredients you can add, then you'd want each checkbox to be a different ingredient, and you want to be able to select however many ingredients you want. So pepperoni, sausage, pineapple, whatever. Now radio button, it's also used for selecting specific options, but radio buttons are used in situations where you only want to make one selection out of all the radio buttons. So for example, if you're ordering a pizza and you want to select the type of sauce, well, it may be possible for some pizza restaurants to select multiple sauces. I haven't encountered one that can do that yet. So in general, pizza places, when you order online, they restrict you to being able to only order one type of sauce per pizza. So this could be, the standard red tomato sauce. The next one could be Alfredo, and then the other one could be creamy garlic, and you can only select one option only, and that's it. So that's the difference between checkboxes and radio buttons. Checkboxes, you can select multiple options, and radio buttons, you can only select one of the options provided. So let me show that really quickly so you can see what that looks like. You can select any of the options just one at a time, whereas with the checkboxes you can select multiple options at the same time. Now let's say, hypothetically, you want to have two different categories of radio button. Let's say you have one category of radio buttons that lets you select the sauce, and then another category of radio buttons that lets you select the crust type, like thin crust, thick crust, deep dish, whatever. So how would we do that? How would we break the categories down into those two separate things? So let me do this really quickly just to, I'll pause the video and then resume it once I've got this set up really quickly. Alright, I'm back. So let's run the program and see why this doesn't work. So select a crust type, and then we can't select an Alfredo sauce or an oil sauce or red sauce without getting rid of our crust. So how do we solve that problem? Well, the answer is by using a group box. So radio buttons that are located inside a group box are basically isolated from the rest of the program, so that, let me pause the video really quickly and then resume it once I'm done refixing this. Oh, and before I do that, I just want to really quickly show you how to move something into a group box. You can't move a group box on top of something because it just covers it up, so you need to put the group box somewhere and then actually move the objects into the group box like so. Just as a heads up on that. But anyways, I'll pause the video now and set things up to make it actually work properly, and then resume when I'm done. Alright, I'm back. And so let's take a look at what we've done. We have two group boxes. I had to add a second group box, and inside the first group box are the crusts. Second group box has the sauces. Let's run the program and I'll show you the result, which I'm sure you can guess what it is already. So obviously we can select whichever crust we want, or we can select a sauce, and we can select both options at the same time. So that's why you want to use group boxes. It's a very useful tool for radio buttons. And what you could also do to make this a bit simpler is you can actually change the name of the group box. I could say one group box is going to be named crust, and the second one is going to be called sauce. And then you could actually then simplify the names of the radio buttons to just say regular or thin. And there we go. So that's how you create and set up your radio buttons and, of course, your checkboxes. Now, there's one last thing, actually two last things I want to show you. So when we're running the program, you probably noticed that some of the radio buttons will sometimes come defaulted as being selected. This time it didn't. I'm not quite sure why, but anyhow, what you can do if you want to select a specific radio button as being defaulted to being selected when the program starts running, then all you have to do is select whichever radio button that is. So let's say you want the thin crust to be your default radio button and Alfredo sauce, because that's the combination I like to get myself, is thin crust and Alfredo. So click on the radio button that you want to be defaulted to, selected, go into the properties pane and go to the checked property and click true. And I'll do the same thing with Alfredo. And then I'll go ahead and run the program. And as you can see, the thin crust and Alfredo were defaulted selected as checked. And you can do the same thing with the checkboxes. That's no different whatsoever. And of course, if you want to run the program and have none of the radio buttons selected as default, then you just want to make sure that the checked property is false. Now, keep in mind, there's this glitch that sometimes happens. I'm not sure why it happens, but sometimes when you run the program, a radio button will be selected by default when you run it, but its checked property will read as being false, which I don't understand it. Like, for example, it would be like thin being checked to false, but the thin crust still gets selected as default when you run the program. If you run into that situation and you don't want the radio button or checkbox to be checked as default, then just go to that particular checkbox, and it should also already say false. What you have to do is go and have it say true, and then make it go back again and say false. I'm not sure why it happens, like I said before, but that's how you fix it, is just set it to true and then set it to false. Also, if you do that, like, let's say, for example, I started the program and the regular radio button was selected as default when I ran the program. I did the true-false fix, and I ran the program again. Then what normally happens is the thin crust then becomes the new default. So you have to do the same process with the thin crust radio button, and then the same thing with the deep dish radio button. And then once you do it for all three, it'll work fine. But it's just a weird glitch I want to make sure you're aware of if you ever run into it, and you know how to handle it. Okay, one more thing I want to go over. This is actually really important to your code. So we need a way to, using our C# programming code, to identify whether or not these different items, different objects, whether or not they're checked or selected. So I'm going to create a really quick button, and actually I'll go ahead and create two buttons. And we're going to set it up so that one button will determine whether or not one of these is checked, and the second button will update the check status of one or more of these objects. In fact, let me make this really simple, and let me just get rid of all this extra stuff. We'll just use these buttons to manage this one checkbox. Everything I'm going to show you is applicable to both checkboxes and radio buttons, so We don't need to replicate this experiment using radio buttons because it's not going to be any different. So let's go ahead and activate our first button, initialize it. I'm not sure if this is something that you've covered yet. Something called an if statement. It's basically, it takes code, and based on the code you get, makes a decision. So our checkbox is named check sausage. See right here? So that's the object name that we'll use to refer to it in our code. So going back to our code, let's go ahead and create our if statement. So basically what we're doing is we're going to check to see if the sausage checkbox is selected or checked or whatever. So what we're going to do is we're going to refer to the checked property of the checkbox. And what this does, it says if the sausage checkbox is checked, then we're going to take some sort of action. And then we're going to say else. This basically means if the sausage checkbox is not checked, then we'll do whatever is inside this else statement. So I'll just do a really quick message box method, and I'll just say sausage is not selected. And then I'll do the same thing over here. Actually, no. Sausage is selected. There we go. Alright, so we have that. Let's go ahead and test our program. Here's our program. We'll select our button, and sausage is not selected. Then if we try selecting sausage and then click the button, sausage is selected. So that's one way you can get feedback from the checked property using an if-else statement. So the next button we have is going to be a button that will actually, let's do 3 buttons really quickly. Let's go ahead and add button 3. Initialize them both. In fact, let me update the text to make this more obvious what we're doing. So the first button is going to select the sausage checkbox, and the second button is going to deselect it. So let's show you how to do that. And this, by the way, this can be used as part of a button that clears your form. So if you want a button to clear your entire form, like all the text boxes or output labels, and you also want to clear or deselect any checkboxes or radio buttons, then the code that we put in our deselect sausage button, which will be in here, that's the code you'll want to use to clear that form or clear that box. Okay, so in our button 2, remember this is the select sausage button. We're going to go and reference the checkbox object and the checked property of that object, and we're going to say that it is equal to true. This statement right here, this statement will select your checkbox during your program while it's running. And then to do the opposite, to deselect the checkbox, false. Here we go. So let's run the program and see what this looks like. Okay, here we go. So select sausage, it automatically selects a checkbox. And then deselect sausage, it deselects it or clears it. You can do the other button still and say sausage is not selected. Then you select the sausage, you click it again, sausage is selected. So this has been a really simple overview of checkboxes, radio buttons, and how to collect the check property and use it. or how to modify the check property when you're running the program. Checkboxes and radio buttons are very, very common in many Windows Form applications, so it's important to understand how to use the check property to make decisions, as well as updating the check property while your program is running. And remember, all this code right here, the syntax is the exact same regardless of whether you're using a checkbox or if you're using a radio button. It's the exact same syntax. So hopefully this video was useful, and I will see you in the next video.